Forward unto us in Jesus' name, chapter 36. It is December 30th. It's 12:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the wee hours of Monday morning at the Stewart home, Pine Forest, Georgia. Melena's eyes flew open when her phone rang. She jumped from her bed and rushed to her computer and accepted the incoming call. Her eyes filled with tears as Jake's gorgeous face filled the screen. "Jake," she said softly as the emotion clogged her throat. He smiled. "Why are you crying, Bugs?" She sniffed. "I was so worried. I didn't know it would take this long. I thought something bad had happened." "Yeah, well, sorry about that. It took longer than we expected. We had some detours we had to take, but God blessed us with some miracles, and we made it through with everyone intact." "Can you talk about it?" He shook his head. "Nope. Still can't talk about it. We'll talk when I come home." She sighed and counted on her fingers. "What are you doing?" "I'm counting. You've been gone over 4 months now." "Yep. You see how fast it's gone by?" She frowned. "It has not gone by fast, you idiot." He chuckled. "I love you, Bugs." She sniffed. "I love you, too. Your hair looks funny." She turned and looked at the mirror over in the corner of her room, giggling. She took the messy bun down and shook her hair out. He nodded. "Better," he sighed. "Can't wait to see all that hair spread out over my pillow." Her face crumpled. "Me too," she whispered. He smiled. "It's going to be so good, Bugs." She nodded. "Describe it to me." He laughed. That's not a good idea, seeing as how I'm surrounded by a bunch of desperate guys right now. Instead, tell me all about what you did for Christmas, what presents everyone got, how are my parents and Hannah getting along, and what crazy things has Gabe gone and done lately. New scene. It is still December 30th. It is now 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Monday morning. West End Sports Medicine and PT Clinic, Los Angeles, California. Tony Mort scooted lower in his seat so he wouldn't see that there was anyone in his car. I'm sorry, try that again. Tony Mort scooted lower in his seat so that she wouldn't see that there was anyone in his car. There were several other vehicles in the parking lot, and he parked in between two parked cars. He'd already been there an hour, watching and waiting, because he didn't know what time she usually arrived at work. Finally, though, her silver Toyota Corolla pulled in and parked on the far left side of the parking lot toward the back. Now that he'd confirmed that she did indeed work here, he would have to wait in his car until she got off and follow her home. Sitting in his car, playing video games and snacking on junk food for the next several hours. Easy $200. She got out of her car. She wore pink scrubs covered by a thick tan-colored sweater. Her shoes were white. It was definitely her. He could tell because of the long black ponytail that came to her waist. Besides all that, she was definitely the looker that had been described. Just looking at her, he wished he'd been told to do more than just find out where the girl lived. The guy who hired him, Ryan Nibbs, intended to shake up this girl's sister so that she'd be afraid to testify against his friend. Tony didn't argue with what the guy wanted to do. He didn't tell him that it wouldn't matter if she testified or not. The state had a case against his friend, and they had a completely credible witness. They didn't need the girl to testify. Tony smiled and shook his head. As long as Ryan wanted to pay him for a day of sitting around in his car, though, he was game. The story behind this was stupid. Some guy, Scott something, was in jail for beating up his girlfriend. His friend, Ryan Nibbs, was told to shake up Kaylee Quinn so that she wouldn't testify against the Scott dude. He went to her home, but she'd moved out, and then he got himself arrested. The Ryan dude was out now, though, and hired Tony to follow this girl home from work and find out where she lives with the sister. Easy. He wouldn't mind if they wanted his services for more, like roughing up the sister or dealing with this girl, though they'd have to pay him a lot more than $200 to do that, and he couldn't let them know that it wouldn't help them a bit. Reaching into the small cooler on his front seat, he pulled out a soda, picked up a bag of chips, and settled in. New scene. It is December 30th, 9:30 a.m. PST. That's Pacific Standard Time. Monday morning. We're still at the West End Sports Medicine and PT Clinic, Los Angeles, California. JoJo Adams pulled up to the clinic. It was a large, square, standalone tan brick building. The parking lot was full, and JoJo ended up having to park in the very last row up closest to the street. Smiling, he made his way into the building. As a medical facility, it was high-end. The reception area was large and sleek and clean and modern, trimmed with wood and stone. Seating was plush. JoJo checked in and had a seat. Immediately, a young man sitting nearby struck up a conversation with him. When the people waiting realized that he was the JoJo Adams, everyone wanted in on the conversation. It wasn't long, though, before JoJo was called back. His eyes scanned the large area, looking for Raylin. He didn't currently see her, but there were several private-type cubicles where she could be. JoJo was approached by a 30-ish, athletic-looking guy with a huge smile. "Hello, JoJo. I'm Lester Moore." JoJo tried to suppress his smile, and Lester nodded. "Yes, I go by Les, and yes, my parents apparently have quite a sense of humor." JoJo laughed. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Les Moore." Lester held out his right hand to shake hands with JoJo. JoJo looked at the hand and back up at the guy. The guy raised his eyebrows and nodded. So JoJo gingerly lifted his right hand up to be grasped by Les. "Squeeze," the man ordered. JoJo did as commanded. It was actually difficult, and he hadn't realized that his hand had become as weak as it suddenly felt. "So, just to be completely honest, I've chatted with Dr. Kino Wallace, and she's let me know what you've been working on with her, and she says to push you a little." JoJo nodded. "So, let's just step back here in the cubicle and get your shirt off, and we'll start from there." JoJo did as instructed. He took off his jacket and his shirt. Les examined him from every angle. His eyes scanned his back, his shoulders, and finally stood back and looked him over from the front. His eyes narrowed, and he reached out and touched JoJo's chest. "So, may I ask about this giant scar?" JoJo nodded. "Oh, it's nice, isn't it?" "I guess that's one way to describe it." "Yeah, when I was in high school, my brother and I were briefly abducted. They broke his arm. They beat me up pretty bad, and they took a knife and they cut a giant X on my chest as a warning to my aunt to discontinue her medical research." "Oh, wow," Les muttered. "Yeah, really, the cut on my chest wasn't nearly as bad as the concussion and the beating that my face took." Les looked closely at JoJo's face. JoJo pointed to a tiny scar on his cheek just under his left eye, and another near the corner of his mouth, and two more along his hairline. Les shook his head. "People are so freaking evil." JoJo nodded. "Some are, and some are good guys." Les sighed. "Well, let's get to work. Come on out here and we'll work on some warm-ups and loosen up that shoulder." JoJo followed him across the floor, and this time he smiled when he spotted Raylin. He drew a breath. Lord have mercy, she was so beautiful. She was currently kneeling next to a teen girl, talking to her about her foot. The girl nodded and pointed her toes, then shook her head and grimaced in pain. JoJo's eyes shifted to the woman standing on the other side of the girl, probably the girl's mother. The woman looked angry. He shook his head and had to make himself focus on what Les was telling him to do. "So let's go to the prom," Les said with a smile. "That's PROM, passive range of motion exercises. Have a seat right here." JoJo took a seat on a table, and Les began lifting JoJo's arm. "Relax your muscles. Let me do the lifting," Les said. JoJo wasn't paying much attention. He was watching Raylin working with the girl. The girl was complaining a lot, but not at Raylin. She was complaining at her mother. Raylin sighed and stood up and looked around. "Let's move over to the bars." Raylin pointed just past where JoJo sat, and he caught her eye. She smiled at him and nodded slightly, and he smiled at her. Les worked on him for some time. Meanwhile, Ray worked on the young girl, and from what JoJo could tell, the girl was in pain. He heard Raylin tell her that she was not ready to go back to dance rehearsal for some big event, and the mother was insistent that Raylin didn't know what she was talking about. At first, only JoJo and Les and a few others could hear what was being said, but the woman finally began to yell at Raylin, and the young girl tried to intervene. "Mom, just stop," she pleaded. "Don't you tell me to stop. You just don't want to put in the work because you're in a little bit of pain." Raylan sighed. Mrs. Cofer, that pain should tell you that she's not ready to go back to rehearsals, unless she goes back to just sit and listen. You just want to keep me bringing her back here as long as possible to make more money off of us. Raylan frowned. Ma'am, that is not true. I get paid the same. If Lexi works her ankle too much before it's completely healed, it could do permanent damage. We can't put a time limit on her healing. I'm sorry, but if I sign off on her ankle and something happens, it would be my fault. Oh, so all you're worried and concerned about is your own reputation, the woman said loudly, gesturing wildly with her hands. Raylan shook her head and spoke very calmly. No, ma'am, that's not it at all. What I'm concerned about is Lexi. Her ankle is not healed, and I'm thinking maybe if you were as concerned about her. Everyone turned at the loud sound of flesh hitting flesh. Raylan gasped at Mrs. Cofer's hand, smacked her in the face. Raylan lifted her own hand to her own cheek, her eyes wide with surprise, and JoJo found himself beside her in seconds. The woman was yelling at Raylan and looking up at the large guy in surprise. He only said 2 words. Stop. Now. The woman looked up at him, and the entire place quieted. Who are you to tell me what to do? She screamed at him. JoJo spoke quietly. I'm going to be your worst nightmare if you don't stop. He looked over at Les. Will you get a manager or supervisor over here, please? Les nodded and ran to do his bidding. That girl has no business telling me to be concerned about my own daughter. Well, it probably appeared to her, as it did to the rest of us here, that you care more about the prestige of your daughter dancing in the festival you've been spouting off about for the past 30 minutes than about her own well-being, so she called it like we all saw it. He looked at Raylan. Her cheek was red, her eyes were filled with tears. Are you okay? She nodded. What's going on? An older woman asked as she approached. This girl accused me of not caring about my own daughter. That's not what I said, Ray began. She's rude and obviously doesn't know how to do her job, and I want her fired immediately. Ray gasped. She turned fearful eyes on her employer. That's not the way it was at all, Ray began. And now she's calling me a liar, Ms. Cofer screamed. Raylan, go to my office, please. Ray turned and left immediately. JoJo stayed and addressed the manager. I heard the whole thing, and that's not how it was. And you know what? I want the police called because this woman assaulted your employee. Young man, the manager began. This is JoJo Adams, Les put in quickly. The woman's entire demeanor changed. You're JoJo Adams? So? So who cares who he is? The woman screamed. Lady, another patient on the other side began. Do you know who JoJo Adams is? No. Who are you? She screamed at JoJo. Like I said, I'm your worst nightmare. New scene. JoJo sighed. He'd had to leave. He was required to be on the field with the team. He texted Raylan and explained that he had to leave, but as soon as they took a break, he'd call her. He had placed a call to his father as he drove back to school to see legally what could be done. Of course, Raylan could press charges for assault, but JoJo felt fairly certain she wasn't going to go for that. But JoJo felt fairly sure she wasn't going to go that far, mostly because she felt her job was on the line. After hearing the manager of the facility, a woman named Melinda Fletcher, apologize all over herself to Mrs. Cofer and beg her to give West End PT another chance, JoJo felt like that could be a real possibility. So he asked his dad if he could look into who this Cofer lady is and see if there was a way for JoJo to put some pressure on Melinda Fletcher. If the Cofers were being catered to because they had money or prestige, JoJo was almost positive that the Kinos had more. But why did it always have to be about that? Why couldn't it just be about someone doing the right thing? This Karen Cofer woman thought she could treat someone like she treated Ray and get away with it. Well, JoJo just couldn't let it drop. It wasn't just because Ray wanted to keep her job. If JoJo had his way, she'd never have to work again. But that wasn't it. It was the principle of the thing. His competitive self was kicking in, and he had to see through this. His competitive self was kicking in, and he had to see this through. Finally, the coach sent everyone to a late lunch and said they would meet in the locker room at 2 p.m., and JoJo immediately called Raylene. She picked up on the first ring. "Hello," she said softly. "Hey, Ray, so what happened?" "Well, I explained to Miss Fletcher, that's my boss, that it wasn't really like Mrs. Kofer said. I explained the whole thing to her. She pulled security video and was not happy with what the woman did, but she also said that I shouldn't have provoked her." "Well, since when is speaking the truth provoking someone to hit you?" "It's getting to where the whole world has gone insane. So tell me, did you get fired?" JoJo asked. "Well, not yet. I was sent home." He sighed. "Okay. May I come over to see you?" "Well, I don't really feel like company." "Well, I don't want to come over to be entertained. I want to come over and give you some support." "Okay," she said listlessly. He sighed. "Okay, listen, I have a meeting at 2. I can probably be at your house by 4, so hang in there." "There's nothing else to do," she said. "See you soon," he said before he hung up. Well, that didn't go well. His phone buzzed and he picked it up. "Hey, Uncle Joey." "Hey, kiddo. So your girl is having a hard day?" "Well, she's not my girl yet, but yes. Do you know something?" "Yep. Mrs. Kofer is Mrs. Lynn Kofer, wife of Baldwin Kofer, president of the Kofer Group, who is a philanthropic organization who contributes a lot of money to the arts. Their daughter, Alexis Kofer, is a young ballet dancer who wants desperately to make it to the big show. She was injured almost a year ago when she broke her ankle playing on a pogo stick, of all things, at a summer party with some friends. It healed, but not all the way. She went to a little bit of PT and then went back to dancing. And she broke it again during a rehearsal 2 months ago for some big winter dance competition. She's been out of a boot for 4 weeks. That's from her Instagram account. She's struggling with a lot of pain. Her doctor says she shouldn't dance on it at all for at least 6 months, but the mom is pushing it." "Okay, the fact that the doc says 6 months is good," JoJo said. "Yep. But that's only from Alexis's postings on social media. We'd have to get documentation of that. So far, we've captured all she said. She also has expressed much disdain for her pushy mother. She may want to be a dancer, but she's also in a lot of pain, and she wants to really heal this time. And on that matter, Raylene is absolutely correct. And even better, Jeffy says she will back her up." JoJo smiled. Well, that will help her a lot. But tell me, Uncle Joey, why is this manager, this Fletcher lady, so desperate for the Kofer's business? "Well, because she sends all of the dancers in the area to West End Sports PT." "So, well, USC sends all of their athletes there too, right? Right?" JoJo said. "Right. Which one creates more revenue for the clinic?" "Well, there are 3 clinics, and it's about equal." Okay. So what if I gave West End a personal endorsement?" "Well, you have that power, JoJo. All the kids in rec ball who aspire to something big, all the kids in middle and high school, you have the power to make or break this place. Of course, you wouldn't want to endorse them if they fire a completely competent and conscientious worker because some Karen is butthurt, if you know what I mean." "Well, I know exactly what you mean. How do you recommend I go about taking this action?" "Well, we don't deal with the manager of this facility. If we have our way, her job might be in jeopardy too. We go to the owner of the 3 locations, which is Brian Cantor." "Brian Cantor. Why does that name sound so familiar?" Joey smiled. "Because Brian is also the owner of Cantor's Football Equipment Center." "Cool. Is he a good guy? I mean, honest and such?" "Not sure about that yet." "So if he's not, I'm not interested in helping him out. I'll just concentrate on being a warrior in the media for Raylene and pressure him that way. If he is a good guy, maybe we can swing a deal. I endorse him, and he apologizes to Ray, brings her back, and makes a better effort to do the right thing in his facilities." Hold on one second. So are we still ticking? Okay. Okay, I'll just concentrate on being a warrior in the media for Ray Lynn, JoJo said, and pressure him that way. If he is a good guy, maybe we can swing a deal. I endorse him, and he apologizes to Ray and brings her back and makes a better effort to do the right thing in his facilities. Sounds good, Joey said. That will achieve your objectives of helping your girl. And then you just have to find a way to be Mrs. Lynn Kofer's worst nightmare. JoJo drew in a sharp breath. Shoot, someone videoed me? Very good. Your mind is still quick. She's such a, Uncle Joey, she's such a piece of work. Someone needs to put her in her place. Well, don't let this be personal. Let God do that. It is personal, Uncle Joey. She went after Ray Lynn. That makes it personal. Okay, so what do you want to do? JoJo sighed. Actually, I'd like to speak to her daughter. Maybe invite her out to the youth group, at least give her some positive input. Now you're talking, buddy boy. I like it. Okay, so do you think you can get me her number? I'll see what I can do. Later, kiddo. Thanks, Uncle Joey. Yep. New scene. Still December 30th, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Monday evening, the Quinn sisters' home, Los Angeles, California. JoJo pulled up behind Ray Lynn's Toyota and glanced over at the blue house with the yellow door. That yellow door, for some reason, it always made him smile. Grabbing the 2 large bags that contained dinner, he jumped from his truck, nodding at the guy in an old green pickup who pulled away from the front of the neighbor's house. JoJo headed toward the yellow door, and Cali answered almost immediately. Hi, JoJo. Come on in, she said solemnly. Hey, Cali, so how's she doing? Not too good. Where is she? She's in her room and says she has decided that she doesn't want to come out and to send you away. He frowned. Is she dressed? Cali nodded. Yes. Well, she was last time I peeked in. Well, do you mind if I go in and check on her? No, I don't mind. I was hoping you would. He set the bags down on the small kitchen table. This is your dinner if you're hungry. Oh, cool. Thanks. He smiled. Well, it's actually our dinner. She giggled. Got it. He nodded and headed down the hallway, knocked softly on her door. When she didn't answer, he peeked in. She was lying in her bed, her back to the door. She was still wearing her pink scrubs. She even still had her shoes on. Sighing, he came in the room, sat carefully on the side of her bed, and placed his hand on her shoulder. Ray, he whispered. She gasped and turned over. It's just me, he said softly. Did you fall asleep? She sat up and scooted her back up against the wall and sniffed. I guess I did. He looked into her green eyes. You look like you've been crying. She shrugged. Sorry. I guess that seems silly. No, it doesn't. It was an emotional experience. I understand. She sniffed again as more tears tried to gather. It's just that I worked so hard to get through school as fast as possible, and I worked so hard to get that job. It wasn't easy. I had to go through a really hard recruitment process, hundreds of people wanting that opening. There were so many tests and interviews and hands-on trials, and now some woman who doesn't care about the well-being of her own child comes in and ruins my life without a thought. She didn't care about anything other than getting her way. Well, people can suck, JoJo said softly. Take a deep breath, Ray. It's all going to work out. Sure. So why did Mrs. Fletcher send me home then? She should have backed me up. I know I'm right. If Lexi starts dancing again on that ankle, it may never heal properly. She could do permanent damage. Does Fletcher have a DPT? No, she isn't a therapist. She's a business manager. He nodded in understanding. Well, that's a problem. He sighed, looking into her teary eyes, and he just wanted to cheer her up. Ray, what can I do for you? I don't know that you can do anything. He smiled at that because after his talk with his uncle, he was pretty sure that he could. He held his left hand out to her, and when she placed her hand in his, he grasped it tightly and pulled her forward. She gasped, and he twisted her until she turned and settled in his lap. Circling her with his arms, he held her tight. She didn't fight, leaning her head against his chest. She relaxed. He used his right hand, lifted it carefully, and brushed his hand over her head and down to her cheek that earlier had been red from being slapped. It's going to be okay, he said firmly. She leaned her head back so she could see his handsome face. You don't know that. I do know that. How do you know? Because I know things you don't know. She sighed. Come on now, I brought some dinner. Thanks, but I'm not hungry. He hugged her tightly. I promise it's going to be okay. She sat there silently, realizing that she was in her room, sitting on her bed, on JoJo Adams' lap, his arms around her, and really, it was a most incredible feeling. She sighed and then smiled up at him. That's better, he said. What's better? You smiled. He glanced down at her mouth. I did not. He grinned. You did. I saw it. Do it again. He watched her mouth, and when she offered a slight smile, he touched her lower lip with the pat of his thumb. She sighed, and his eyes shifted from her mouth to her eyes and back to her lips, and he couldn't fight it. He lowered his head and lightly, ever so softly, touched his lips to hers. He kissed her gently, once, twice, and the third time he kissed her like a girl ought to be kissed. She gave a slight whimper as she lifted her arms up around his neck and held on for dear life. Twisting in his arms, she tried to get closer to him and ended up on the bed with him next to her. He covered her with his body and kissed her several more times until he realized he was having very erotic thoughts. He raised up, moved aside, and sat up on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, Ray, if that was too much. I didn't mean to take advantage of you. She giggled. I didn't mean to take advantage of you either. Well, you can take advantage of me anytime you want, he said, raising his eyebrows up and down. And she gave a slight laugh. Oh, really, Ray? I hope you don't think that was too forward. It wasn't my plan. Oh, well, what was your plan? He smiled. I was going to comfort you today, and I was going to kiss you tomorrow night at midnight. She nodded her head. Is that plan scrapped now? No. She smiled. Well, then I'll accept the comfort, and I'll look forward to tomorrow night. It sounds good, he said. So how will you comfort me? He smiled. Well, first, I'm going to feed you, and then I'm going to tell you all about what I found out and the plans I have to make it right. Have you found me another job? You haven't been fired yet, and you won't be. I guarantee it. Well, that actually is comforting. You should have led with that. He chuckled. Well, if I'd done that, I might not have had the chance to kiss you. She nodded. He stood and pulled her up and took her in his arms. Before we leave the privacy of your room, just once more. She stood on her toes, and he tilted her face up and kissed her, and when he pulled away, he shook his head. Wow. She smiled. Wow? Yeah, wow. I won't be able to get enough of that for a very long time. Well, to Ray Lynn, that sounded like a very good thing right now. The only good thing she could think of happening. New scene. JoJo shared dinner with the Quinn sisters and took an early leave, though it had been tempting to stay a little later and have some more alone time with Ray Lynn. His father had texted him with Brian Cantor's phone number and the message that preliminary investigations seemed to point to Brian being a good guy, but they would have to actually speak to him to make the complete decision. The man is 47 years old. He's married. He has 3 children, son age 23, son age 18, and daughter age 16. His father then asked if JoJo wanted him to call or if JoJo wanted to do it himself. And as tempting as it had been to let his father handle it for him, he decided he was supposed to be a man and should act accordingly. So he ate dinner with Ray and Kay, got in his car, and drove home. But instead of going inside, he sat in his car to make the call. JoJo frowned when the call went to message. And rather than leave a message, which almost no one ever takes time to check these days, he hung up. Mr. Cantor, my name is JoJo Adams, and I'm currently receiving PT at one of your facilities. I would like to speak to you about an incident that happened earlier today. Please call me. The voice said, Is this really JoJo Adams? Yes, sir. Your name doesn't come up on the call. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry about that. My number is encrypted. Security reasons. I understand. What can I do for you, JoJo? Sir, have you heard about what happened at the West End PT clinic earlier today? Actually, I was not told of the incident. But right before you called, my daughter was telling me about something she saw on social media about it. Yes, sir, it appears it's going viral. I'm sorry about that, Brian Cantor said. Oh, that part is no problem. I'm used to it. What I'm calling about, Mr. Cantor, is, well, actually, I'm calling on behalf of the employee, Raylan Quinn, who was the center of the altercation today. Well, if she was in the wrong, I promise you she will be disciplined or let go. Well, that's why I'm calling, Mr. Cantor. She was not in the wrong. I'm calling to defend her and make sure she does not lose her job. Oh, I see. Well, since I haven't been filled in on this, maybe you should tell me what exactly happened. JoJo went on to tell the man everything that happened. He told him to watch the security video and to see if he could find the full video from a teen who'd posted his own video online. And after he finished the telling, he went on to give his opinion. Mr. Cantor, JoJo started. Please call me Brian. Oh, yes, sir, I'll try, though I'm used to showing respect to people older than I am. Brian chuckled. Well, that is wonderful, Mr. Adams. I've heard that about you, that you are respectful and well-mannered, except when you're on the field. JoJo laughed. Yeah, I might get a little exuberant when I'm on the field. So, JoJo, what is it you're asking of me? Well, it's several things. First, I want to make this right for your employee. You say she's being disciplined? Yes, sir. I mean, not formally, but it seems she is because rather than giving her the benefit of the doubt, she was told to go home. Now, that might sound simply like a de-escalation type of move. However, it comes across as more of a punishment. The woman who actually assaulted the employee was catered to and apologized to rather than having her removed from the facility. The manager, I understand her name is Melinda Fletcher, should have backed up and supported her employee. Well, I agree. The employee did not push or touch the client, correct? Correct. I witnessed the entire altercation. Now, the woman who assaulted your employee is powerful. I had my uncle do some looking into things. You know my uncle is second in command at Ameritech Security. Yes, I do happen to know that. My uncle found that the woman, Lynn Kofer, is the wife of Baldwin Kofer of the Kofer Group, and they have a lot of money and power in the world of the arts and especially dance. Their daughter, the one I told you this whole thing is about, who is not ready to get back on her feet, her name is Alexis Kofer and goes by Lexi, and she is a ballet dancer who has broken her ankle twice. And your uncle was able to get into private medical records? Oh, no, sir. He got that off Lexi's social media accounts. Got it. Anyway, I believe your manager, Ms. Fletcher, was catering toward Ms. Kofer because the woman has some power to recommend your facility to any and all dancers who have injured themselves and need rehabilitation. And that's a lot of business. She's making a business decision, that is, a decision based on money, based on a bottom line, rather than doing what is right in this circumstance. I understand trying to make wise business decisions, but never at the cost of one's integrity or at the cost of the integrity of your business. For how long would your good reputation last if an employee recommends a slower rehab period for someone and that employee is fired, and then your facility gives the green light to this dancer and she injures her foot for life? I know for sure that I'm depending on the expertise of my therapist at your center to help my shoulder rehab to where I can play again. If not for the pros, then at least to coach. Will that therapist give me the treatment and the recommendations that are best for me or for your bottom line? How could I know? You are making a very good point, JoJo. Thank you, sir. May I ask this Melinda Fletcher? I'm sure she has a reputation for making good business decisions that keeps you in the black, but is she a physical therapist? Does she know anything about physical therapy? If she did, she would have known, as did we all who were present today, patients and therapists, we all knew that what that woman was screaming and yelling about was not in the best interest of her daughter. And what are you getting at? Well, sir, just an outsider's point of view, but I'm thinking the manager who runs your facility should at least be a DPT and should have lots of experience in treating patients. Well, I once thought that too, but was convinced that the person running the business should be someone who knows business and how to increase it, and that we shouldn't waste a good therapist behind a desk. JoJo nodded as he thought. Hello? Oh, yes, sir. Sorry, I was just thinking. So to me, the answer to that problem would be to have a business manager and a manager over the therapist. And the business manager cannot fire a therapist. And the therapist manager cannot fire, let's say, the accountant or like the receptionist. Or at least they must both have power and they must both agree on the firing of a therapist. I mean, for example, the man who's my therapist, he is exuberant and friendly and obviously knows what he's doing and has a lot of experience. If you were to ask him what he thought of today's fiasco, I'm sure he would agree that the Kofor woman was way out of line and your employee, Raylyn Quinn, was exactly correct in what she said. And just another thought, as far as wasting a good therapist behind a desk, maybe as they get older and have more experience, they might want a break and work as a therapist supervisor. Maybe they might want to still work with patients, but not as many as they can do a duo type of job. I mean, again, just as an example, my therapist, his name is Lester Moore. I sent him this morning to get a supervisor, and he ran and got the manager. She immediately sent Miss Quinn to sit in her office, and then straight away began apologizing to Miss Kofor, who was demanding she fire Miss Quinn, which is ridiculous. If, for example, Lester had been a supervisor, he would have de-escalated the situation by explaining what could happen to her daughter if she gets back on her foot too early. He could give her a second opinion on the situation and maybe even simply offer to have her work with a different therapist. Mrs. Fletcher was unable to do that because she knew pretty much nothing about the rehabilitation of a dancer's broken ankle. Well, it sounds like you've given this a lot of thought. I have, JoJo said. I don't like injustice, Mr. Cantor. I mean, Brian, he sighed. Sorry, sir, I can't do it. I'll have to go with Mr. Cantor. Brian nodded. No problem. So, Mr. Cantor, may I ask you a few questions? Sure. You are the same Brian Cantor who owns the football equipment company, correct? Yes. What made you decide to go into that business? Well, I had two sons who both played football. When those boys were little and playing pee-wee football, I found that one company had a monopoly of providing equipment for thousands of teams statewide. I thought I could provide a better, more organized situation for teams not only in our state, but as you probably know, I've grown to a national company. We provide good equipment and uniforms for all ages at reasonable prices, and even offer discounts to poorer areas and help with fundraisers too. JoJo nodded. So, sir, it sounds like you've done a magnificent job of increasing your business from a state level to a national level. Did you use questionable business practices in order to do so? Well, no, of course not. I wanted to show my boys that it could be done in an honest and fair way, and it took hard work and late nights, but I made it happen. JoJo smiled. That is awesome, Mr. Cantor. And when did you decide to go into the physical therapy business? When my oldest son was injured in a high school football game, he ruptured his Achilles tendon. He had surgery and had 12 weeks of physical therapy, and the therapy sessions were a nightmare. Waiting long periods of time in an uncomfortable waiting room, a therapist trying to work on 2 or 3 patients at a time and not really paying attention to each patient's needs. I said to my wife one day that someone needs to open a PT clinic and run it right. And she dared me to make it happen. And so I did. I try to make sure appointments are not scheduled too close together, that the facilities are bright, comfortable, and not a stressful place to be, because the patients are already going through a hard, stressful time. I try to hire the best, the most knowledgeable, the most charismatic, and confident therapist, because confidence instills confidence in the patients. I wasn't as worried about the money I would make as I wanted to see if it could be done with integrity and honesty. And I thought I'd accomplished my goal, but apparently I have not. Well, what happened earlier today wasn't actually a failure, JoJo said, as much as a call to action, Mr. Cantor. I'm young and obviously not in a place to offer business advice to anyone. However, I do know when I can make a difference. I asked you all those questions because I wanted to see where your head was at, what kind of businessman you are. I guess I wanted to know if your bottom line trumped your ethics, and from what you say, it seems like ethics and honesty comes first. Well, I hope that's how I come across in the business world. I realize, Mr. Cantor, if you go against your manager, Melinda Fletcher, and against Mrs. Kofor and keep your employee, Kofor might threaten to send the dance business elsewhere, and you could lose business. Brian sighed, yes. I could, and I probably will, but I have to do what's right in this situation. I'm glad you think that, but I don't want you to take my word for it. Talk to the other therapists that were present there today. Ask them what they think. Do a little investigating. JoJo, your word is good for me. Well, I truly appreciate that, but I'm saying for you to not take my word for it because I may not be very objective. So, full disclosure, I know Raylene Quinn personally. I want to be completely honest with you. You may have heard a few weeks ago when a man was beating a girl in the USC parking lot, and I helped the girl. Her name is Cali Quinn. In helping Kaylee, I met Raylene Quinn at the hospital. She's Kaylee's sister, and they both are really good girls. I mean, young ladies. I've gotten to know them both well. I asked Raylene out on a first date just 2 days ago. I found out she worked where I would be going for my PT, so when I saw her there this morning, I was very interested in what was taking place. The video you saw will show me stepping in after Ms. Kofer hit Raylene. Because I'm sorry, it's not in me to stand by and watch some completely sweet and innocent girl, get slapped across the face like that when it was obvious that no one was going to step in. So that's the situation. I thought about going on social media. I still could, I guess, to try to clear up this situation. I do have influence, but I wanted to bring everything straight to you first. I see. Is that a veiled threat? Oh, no, sir. I was just thinking out loud. So anyway, Mr. Cantor, do your own investigation, and I hope you'll do the right thing. Make the right changes. If anyone should be called to right, it should be Fletcher and, of course, Mrs. Kofer. I asked Raylene to file assault charges against the Kofer lady, but she's afraid to do so because she thinks it will lessen her chances of keeping her job, and she's probably right about that as it stands right now. And that's why I came to you, in hopes that right, truth, and justice will prevail. He stopped and chuckled. I realized that sounded cheesy. Brian laughed. Oh, cheesy's always good. Yeah, on a pizza. JoJo, it has actually been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to call me and explain the situation. I apologize that your first day of therapy began in such an unpleasant way. When is your next session scheduled? 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Okay, then, I have some things to attend to. Thanks again, JoJo. Thank you for your time, Mr. Cantor. You're welcome, and good night. Good night, sir. New scene. It is now December 31st, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday morning, Tanner Home, Pine Forest, Georgia. Higher, Gabe. Go higher, Iris screamed in delight. If I go any higher, you're going to fall out of the swing. I don't care. I think I'm gonna fly. Gabe's eyes opened in horror as his sister let go of the swing. He dove for her as she tumbled backward. He caught her, but then the wooden swing came back and bashed him in the side of the head. He grunted as he hit the ground, rolling to keep Iris from being hurt. He sprawled onto his back and lay there. Iris put her little hands on his cheeks. Gabe, is you okay? He groaned. Gabe, is you hurt? When he didn't answer, she jumped up and went running into the house. Daddy, Gabe is hurt. Keegan looked up from his phone. Hey, Dalton, check in, leader. Something's going down. Keegan rose. Where is he? Outside. The swing hit him. I think he's dead. Keegan ran outside. Lizzie came running down the stairs and also headed out the back door. Gabe was sprawled on his back, now lying under the swing that had come to a halt. Keegan knelt next to his son. He was breathing. He checked his pupils, and Gabe moaned and opened his eyes. What happened? Lizzie said as she knelt down. Gabe scooted out from under the swing and sat up, and he put his hand to the side of his head and groaned. That little munchkin happened. Iris, why did you do that? What did she do? Keegan asked. She let go. I was gonna fly, she said, her little chin starting to quiver. Gabe pulled his hand away from his head, and Lizzie gasped. Oh, my goodness, Gabe, you're bleeding, Lizzie said. Keegan held out his hand. Can you stand? Gabe nodded, took his father's hand, and let him pull him up. Come in the house and let me see if you need stitches, Lizzie said. He sighed and went inside, and Keegan scooped up his daughter and carried her in. He took her to his office and sat her on his lap and played back the security camera. He scowled. Iris, what were you thinking? I was gonna fly, she said again. He played it back and watched again. Sweetie, you can't fly. We humans don't fly. If Gabe hadn't caught you, you could have been hurt. And now Gabe got hurt because he had to catch you. Her eyes filled with tears. I sorry, Daddy. It felt like I can fly. I understand that feeling. It's a nice feeling, but always remember, people don't fly. If we try, we will fall and get hurt. She nodded. Is Gabe gonna die? No, he's not gonna die, but he's hurt. He got bloody. That's right, he got bloody, and you need to go in the kitchen and tell him you're sorry and tell him thanks for not letting you fall. Got it? She sniffed. Yes, sir. He hugged her. I love you, Iris. I love you too, Daddy. No more jumping out of swings. I didn't jump, Daddy. I let go. He tried to keep from smiling. Well, no more letting go then. Yes, sir. He stood and put her on the floor and offered his hand. Come on, let's go see how he's doing. They went to the kitchen. Gabe sat in a chair while Lizzie cleaned up the blood and examined the wound. Stitches? Keegan asked. Lizzie shook her head. I think I can just clean it up real good and use some of the Dermabond. He'll be okay. Iris put her hands on Gabe's thighs. I saw you, Gabe. I won't let go anymore. He smiled at her. Good. Thank you for catching me. You're welcome. Keegan chuckled. Wait till you see what happened on the security footage, Lizzie. It was actually pretty impressive the way he dove in there to save her. He was the one flying. Gabe smiled, but the smile lasted only a little while. He was a little down. He missed Taylor something awful. This evening, everyone would be at the Kino's plantation home at a New Year's Eve ball. They would be holding on to the one they love. Only a few people wouldn't. Lanebug, Lily, the younger kids. Oh, sorry. Lanebug, Lily, the younger kids, and him. He wasn't the type to walk around feeling sorry for himself. He was extremely blessed. And so today he would be in service mode, doing what he can for the members of his family and his community. And tonight, after he helped with the setup, he'd dance with Lily and Lena and with Iris and would try to bless those he came in contact with. No big deal. It wouldn't always be like this, and he could handle it. And that is the end of chapter 36.